Hey everyone, Johannes Kornberger here from Mackinder Insights. In this video, I want to talk about why Iran did not end up closing the Strait of Hormuz during the 12-day war between Iran and Israel and the United States. I just learned today that the US was aware through satellite imagery that Iran wasn't just preparing to close the strait from a legal and administrative side, they were also taking practical steps on the ground to close the strait by loading up sea mines onto ships and then preparing those ships to be sent out if the order was given. But no order was given from Iran, and they did not end up taking this very drastic step to close the strait. And I want to talk about why. If you have your own thoughts or comments, please let me know in the comments below. But this is all speculation, and I'm hoping to zero in on the reason by applying some geopolitical logic to this situation. Let's talk about the Strait of Hormuz briefly. It's a global artery for oil, for trade, and it services the Middle East region, the Gulf states, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Doha, Iraq, Kuwait. They all rely on the Strait of Hormuz in one way or another, whether that's shipping out their oil or whether it's receiving imports, vital imports of goods. So for that region, it's very important. That's number one. For the global economy, it's not super important, but it still plays a role. About 20% of global oil does pass through the region, so it does play a role in terms of not necessarily oil supply, but it plays a role in terms of price stability. So if that strait was cut off and oil did stop flowing through, that would drastically decrease the supply of oil and therefore impact the prices. And it's that particular point that kind of plays a role in terms of which players have a lot to gain and which players may have a lot to lose from closing this strait. And Iran probably was thinking about all of this as it made its decision during the conflict. So let's take a look at which players are involved. Number one, let's look at China, because this is perhaps the main reason why Iran did not close this strait. Iran relies on China for its oil exports. In fact, China is Iran's number one customer. They buy upwards of 90% of Iran's oil. That's because not many other countries want to or can. China is one of the few countries that has taken steps to circumvent a lot of US sanctions that are essentially restricting where Iran can send its oil and who can buy it. But China has come up with a system of buying Iranian oil that kind of circumvents those sanctions. And that's important because China sees Iran as a key regional strategic ally, kind of allowing them to have not leverage, but a country that is essentially diametrically opposed to US interests in the Middle East region. It's great for China to have countries like that on board. Otherwise, it itself would feel very isolated as it pursues its regional plan and its regional perspective. So for China, that's very much an important ally to have, and buying oil helps keep the Iranian economy afloat. Not much else will. So from a Chinese perspective, closing the strait is not a good idea, and they did urge Iran not to do so. And Iran probably listened to that and felt that it would be best not to annoy or frustrate one of their key strategic supporters in the region. So that makes sense. From the Russian perspective, and they're another big player in not just geopolitically speaking, but in terms of oil, Russia would actually probably, ironically, be the country that would gain most out of a closed Strait of Hormuz, because oil prices would eventually go up, and then Russia, a big oil producer itself, would then be able to sell its oil at higher prices, something that they desperately want right now, actually, because of their war in Ukraine and the whole energy market situation over there. So for Russia, it would have actually not mattered that much, and we probably saw little leverage from that point. So China, very much against closing the strait. Russia, kind of agnostic, but perhaps secretly wanting it to happen. The US probably cares the least, although it is very much supportive of its allies in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, who would have been very disappointed if this had gone through. So the US was probably listening to its allies in the region and thinking about global oil prices and the sort of optics of the situation when it urged Iran not to close the strait as well. So China and the US are both against closing the strait and applying leverage in different ways. And then we have a bunch of other countries in the region which are not necessarily relying on Iranian oil, but relying on relatively stable prices. For example, India, a lot of countries in Southeast Asia rely on that strait being open. So for them, it made sense that, applying any kind of pressure, whether that be through China or through the United States, would make sense. Now, when it comes to Iran itself, this is probably the second major point when it comes to Iran's decision not to close this strait, is the fact that Iran's economy itself actually relies on the Strait of Hormuz being open. Closing the strait would actually damage not only their relationship with China, but their domestic economy as well. Iran relies on this strait not just to export oil, but also to import vital goods that it needs to support its population. So not a great idea at all. And that's probably why we saw Iran thinking about this in strategic terms as a real last resort. So if you're an Iranian strategist looking at the situation, you probably want to hold off on that decision until the very last point. This is a kind of blow it all up situation. So that's it from me today. Let me know your thoughts. What do you think? Why did Iran not close the Strait of Hormuz? And yeah, let's keep the discussion going. If you haven't subscribed already, please do. And I'll be releasing more of these videos in the near future. Thanks for watching.